Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. Thank you for being here. Today, I'd like to revisit one of the most important and seldom discussed anomalies of the 19th century, a key occurrence which went hand in hand with the Industrial Revolution. For this facet of history, we will turn our attention to a landscape that once bore the name of Tartary, or Grand Tartaria, but now this specific location is one of great turmoil and conflict. The Crimean Peninsula was the site for much of the conflict of the Crimean War, which officially occurred from October of 1853 through February of 1856. Today, the Crimean Peninsula is again under intense conflict and scrutiny as a key contested area between Russia and Ukraine. Internationally, the Crimean Peninsula is recognized as part of Ukraine, but has been occupied by Russian forces since 2014. And this was a large part for the basis of the current war between Russia and Ukraine. Another way to look at it, at least from our elder old world perspective, would be to question if the current conflict is not related to the rewriting, retelling, and repurposing of certain ancient histories and beliefs, stemming from centuries-old monumental architecture. We're going to focus on the Crimean Peninsula today, during the Crimean War, with a collection of images dated from 1853 through 1856. While I've shared a handful of these images before, I believe it prudent to examine these images in more detail, and while reading deeper into this alleged history, I found myself locating even more high-quality photographs of Crimea in the 1850s, which I have never shared with you before. However, this collection is actually a lot more revealing than you may initially realize. For starters, these images are the first war photographs ever taken. Again, I use that definition loosely, as pretty much every image we will look at today is clearly a posed or planned photograph. Some may argue that it took longer to capture a photograph in the 1850s, and while this is very true, we can also see things like people in motion and pack animals in these photographs, both of which would be pretty hard to capture if the photographs truly took numerous seconds to capture. I think that's just another facet of the plausible deniability that's been interweaved into most of this narrative. However, there are numerous things about these images that an untrained eye might not be able to initially pick up on. And those are the aspects of the photographs that I'd like to focus on today. As we dive deeper into these images, the first photographs ever taken during an active war, there are a few things I'd like you to look out for in the photographs. First, why are these specific locations chosen for the battles? As you'll come to see, nearly all of this part of Tartary or Crimea was a barren landscape. Where are all the trees? Where is the wildlife? I can't see so much as a single bush in any of these photographs. Yet, we have wide-angle images here that showcase vast tracts of land without a single tree. How were they sustaining life? Next, where are the alleged defenses? We're told very directly in the narrative that Russia had built vast fortifications along the major port cities, including throughout the Crimean Peninsula. We're also told that vast castles have existed in these strategic locations for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The question then becomes, if the conflict was to control the area, and the area was controlled from these fortifications, where are the fortifications in these images? It truly goes back to the emptiness of the landscape that's being photographed. There's quite literally almost nothing to be seen. There's no cities, there's no towns, there's almost no architecture of any kind. There are no animals, there are no trees, there is no wildlife. We're told a bulk of these images are from the Battle of Balaclava in October of 1854, which was fought as a way to gain control of the fortified port of Sevastopol, which was also Russia's largest naval base at the time, which controlled the bulk of the North Sea. The next question becomes, where exactly is the port city in these photographs? Where are the multitude of ships that were said to have used this harbor on a daily basis? Where is any of the infrastructure? How can we believe that this specific region was one of the leaders of trade in Russia when there's quite literally nothing of substance, at least architecturally, that is shown in any of these images? How was anyone able to survive in this barren-looking wasteland? And the next question goes hand in hand with many of the earlier ones. Why are the officers dressed so nicely? Why is everyone, not just the officers, appearing so clean? If this was truly an active war zone that people had to march to, they had to ride their horses to, basically they had to go out of the way for days on end, sometimes months on end, to end up at these battlefields, how is anyone having time to get so clean, to pose for photographs, to wait for what could have been dozens of minutes to set up the camera, to focus the camera, to capture the image? How was any of that possible in an active war zone? Furthermore, I've gone through and I've translated the title for each and every image in hopes of giving us a better understanding of what we're looking at. But I can't help but notice the vast difference in characters that are shown throughout these images. We literally have people of all shapes, all sizes, basically every phenotype that we can imagine is pictured at some point in these images. Yet we are also of the belief that all of these different people photographed are all working on the same side of the battle. That is, the side that is opposing Tartary or opposing Russia. Again, just for example, we have images of military leaders arriving to their camps. How can you walk or ride a horse through a barren wasteland like the one pictured, and then have shoes that are without a mark, clothes that are completely spotless? How were they able to clean their clothes, and why would they have done this before or after a battle? Does that even make sense in the context of the narrative that we are given? Also, very striking to me was just how small many of the people appear to be in some of these photographs. Again, I don't want to read into this or wax on it too much, but this is just a different theory. We see the makeshift buildings that were created by the soldiers, the camps and things like that, and they have entrances that are shown that are maybe 5.5 feet to 6 feet tall. But they are nowhere near as tall as the buildings that we see throughout the old world. Again, that's most likely because this is wartime and these structures were built to be temporary. But it's also worth note that in the case of temporary buildings that were also being built at this exact same time period, like those at the World's Fairs, those buildings often had entrances that were at least 10 feet tall. Now, why I mention that? In all of these images, we only have what appears to be one person who is taller than 6 feet. It's a man who's taller than all of the doorways in the photographs that he appears in. And this gentleman also has an entirely different look in general, a different phenotype than anyone else that is pictured. Furthermore, throughout the images, he is given the title of the Postmaster of Crimea, whose name is given as, quote, Mr. Angel. I probably don't need to read into that too much for you, but if you're looking for another interesting tidbit, research angels in Russian history. To me, it appears this Mr. Angel character, who is fighting on the side that is opposing Russia, may actually have ties back to Russia and the more esoteric portion of this history. But I digress. Finally, the views of Balaclava appear to show a bulk of the troops excavating something. We can see perfect circles surrounding many of these camps, with the earth piled up around the circles in what appears to be man-made earthworks. We also have many photographs that show what appears to be digging or piles of rubble of some kind, with absolutely no wildlife shown in any of these photographs. Then, when we finally do have a fortress that is photographed, it appears to have just been discovered or excavated by the troops. It's quite literally mostly underground. We have numerous images of soldiers posing outside the entrances to the underground chambers of this fortress, and those images, tied with the wide-angle photographs that appear to show excavations, leads me to propose a theory that this Crimean War of the 1850s may have been part of a larger plot to rediscover and retake parts of Russia, the former Tartaria. I don't just mean to gain them territorially, as for lack of a better term, there's not much to gain here above the surface of the earth. It's quite literally as barren as a desert. Yet, as we have closer photographs, these images clearly appear to showcase a manufactured movement, with the images acting as a catalyst to reintroduce society to new concepts, the new narrative, and to help document the cataclysm in plain sight. For if there was evidence of a superior culture that existed in this area before the year 1800, and if it was wiped out through some event, like a cataclysm or a series of events which reshaped the landscape, would it not be prudent to the powers that arose following this event to regain control of the narrative through the documentation of these most unexplored locations, giving them a new history that could easily be disguised under the guise of war? Was Mr. Angel, the postmaster of Crimea, a Tartarian? Can anything that we see in these images truly be labeled as more than a barren and empty landscape? Could these massive hillsides, the mountains, the rolling empty landscape of Crimea actually have numerous other buried fortresses like the ones that we see in these images? Could Crimea, or Tartary, have been one of the places most heavily affected by the Great Change that's theorized to have reshaped history before the year 1800? Nothing about the Crimean War really adds up. Does this really seem like the location, of all places, where British cameramen would capture the first photographs ever taken of a war? Yet, that's exactly what we're told happened here. And would you believe it? All of the history actually ties back to Jerusalem. But doesn't everything? The Crimean War was said to have been caused by disputes between France and Russia in Palestine, which was from 1517 through 1917 under Ottoman control. The Sublime Court of the Ottomans refused to grant Orthodox Russians special protection in Palestine. The Russians then responded by occupying most of Moldavia and Wallachia. Here's where it gets really strange though. The Ottomans immediately declared war on Russia. Obviously, there are distinct family ties that can be made between the royal families of Russia and the royal families of Europe, especially in England. So I find it kind of surprising that when the Ottomans declared war on Russia in October of 1853, the Ottoman forces were joined by the French, the British, and even some Italian forces. Imagine the sheer power of 19th century France and Britain alone. Again, none of the history here really makes sense. The Ottomans, the French, the British, and the Italians landed in Crimea in 1854, hoping to capture Russia's most large naval base in Sevastopol. Roughly 3 massive battles occurred that all ended in a relative stalemate. Then for 11 months, all of Sevastopol and the ancient port were destroyed during a deadlock siege. The result, at the end of the war, almost nothing changed except architecture was destroyed. Most of the ancient castles across Crimea were destroyed. History was lost. But as far as real change goes, I'll let you decide. After 11 months, Russia sued for peace and the siege was ended. The French and the British already were said to have wanted peace because domestically, the Crimean War was disliked by most of their people. With the Treaty of Paris in 1856, Russia was not allowed to have a military base in the Black Sea anymore. Moldavia and Wallachia became largely independent again, and Orthodox Christians gained slightly more power in the Ottoman Empire. Besides that, the only real change was, we are told, that a bunch of ancient fortifications were destroyed. It really makes you wonder. According to the narrative, the Crimean War was the first modern war, as it used naval shells, railways, telegraphs, and photographs for the first time in war. Others may see it as the first major conflict, which was planned and orchestrated from top to bottom by the powers that were attempting to rewrite the narrative. Again, look at the photographs. There's almost nothing here above the surface. It's just barren. It's empty. The soldiers, the leaders of the army, they're all dressed to the teeth in the finest attire, seemingly as casual as can be during what we're told was one of the bloodiest and most important wars in history. In just 2.5 years, we're told the Allied French, British, Italian, and Ottoman forces lost well over 160,000 people. And it's even worse for the Russians, or Tartarians, who lost over 450,000 people. Yet the photographs from, quote, war literally show almost nothing happening except what appears to be excavations and people posing in their Sunday best.